Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to talk about Paul of Dune by Brian Herbert and Kevin J. Anderson. So, as usual, we're going to talk non-spoilery thoughts and opinions up front and then move over to the spoiler section where we can talk in more detail. So, remember to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and let's begin. So, Paul of Dune is one of the more recently written kind of like add-ins to the series. So, after the entire Frank Herbert series was completed, more or less completed, the seventh book I think was never finished. His son and Kevin J. Anderson decided to write some more stuff. So, there's a couple of in-between books, as I mentioned in my reading order breakdown. So this first one, Paul of Dune, takes place in between Dune itself and Dune Messiah. And there is, right off the bat, a huge difference in the writing styles. Oh my god, they're so incredibly different. So I want to say unequivocally that this does not hold up to Dune, like, at all. Like, the entire sense of it is so completely different that it feels like it shouldn't even claim to be in the same, like, universe, in my opinion. It's so it's it's literally exactly as I said in the breakdown in the order that I want to read it. That it really feels like the difference between philosophy disguised as sci-fi versus sci-fi trying to aspire to become philosophy, and like this one barely aspires to be philosophy. It's just very basic, run of the mill kind of sci-fi, and it doesn't add much of anything. Like there's a bunch of time jumping kind of stuff going on in here, right? So we learn about the War of Assassins that happened while Paul was like 12 or something. So we're doing some flashback stuff, going back into his past, learning about that story. And we're also like learning about it from the former emperor's perspective and stuff, and the people planning it out. And then there's some stuff going on in present day with people trying to assassinate Paul, Muad'Dib and stuff. And then there's basically just more, I think, context for stuff that comes up later, like this idea of what is basically people being resurrected. They're almost like lifeless from Warbreaker, because they're literally dead people that are resurrected, and they can make use of their skills and intelligence and stuff and make them like these kind of, I mean, I don't want to call them Golem, but they're basically Golem, but they seem to be more intelligent than average Golem. But I think really the goal was to try to add a little bit more to that and like kind of flesh a little bit of that stuff out, even though it doesn't really seem to accomplish that. Because I got out of this book feeling like I didn't learn anything more about Paul or learning anything more about the universe of Dune, really. So I can't even say that this story really adds anything to the pantheon of knowledge that Dune is. One of my primary issues was the fact that we are in these stories, especially the one about the War of Assassins, and there's so much going on, and there's like so many people getting like killed and killed off and stuff, and they're going after these really high profile people like the Atreides and stuff like that. But the problem is we know Dune. Like, I've read Dune, so like none of this stuff matters. Like, there's no tension for anything. There's no there's not even the slightest hint for half of a second that any of these plans are going to work, because you already know how it turns out. Like, there's a point, well, I'll talk more about that in the spoiler section in case you do want to read it. But there's the writing style in this is completely different. It feels honestly less mature than Dune did. It feels like it feels a little disconnected from the main themes. It feels more like they're trying to play cover for Paul for stuff that he does later, almost. It's like there's a lot of hints that he's going to do some stuff that's not going to be kosher, like stuff that people aren't going to like sanitizing the planet and stuff like that. But it seems like Brian Herbert and Kevin J. Anderson is basically working so hard to like absolve Paul of the guilt of doing some of these things that he sees as right. It's just really weird and despondent. And it's so strange to me that I would immediately have these feelings after only having read Dune. Like, Dune was a bit of a tough read because the style of it is so different. Everything it's saying is kind of thick. And so, like, you kind of got to really get into it and, like, steep your mind in it. And Will you even try to do that with this one? Like with Dune, when you do that, you steep your mind into it, you get really into it, you get rewarded with a lot of interesting thought experiments, a lot of like questions and stuff, and it just kind of, at least for me, it gets my brain really going. It gets me like thinking about stuff and all that kind of stuff. But this, it really seriously doesn't. Like, it's the complete opposite. Like, it's such a dead end. Like the idea of something being a cul-de-sac. Like this is what this feels like. We're going into this, and there's no out. There's no greater purpose to it at all, it feels like. And as I said before, there's no tension because we know everything that happens later. So it doesn't come across as necessary at all. And before I jump over into the spoiler section, I want to say I ran into a interview. I saw an interview with Brian Herbert and I think someone else basically talking about this book. It was from some years ago. And they said something in the interview that I thought was so incredibly disrespectful. I couldn't believe that they said it. They basically were saying that this is a new starting place for Dune. Like if you're entering the Dune universe, you can start with this book. Like that feels so incredibly disrespectful to me because this entire book wouldn't exist without the brilliance that was Dune and that is Dune and like the universe that it spins off and everything that like it just gives you, like all this in-depth world that it is and all this stuff. This book wouldn't exist without it. So then to call this a new starting place, which implies you can skip the actual original that is responsible for all of this, to me that is so insulting and so disrespectful. I didn't like it, and it immediately put a bad taste in my mouth. So having already not really enjoyed the book and then saw that interview, I was like, ugh. So it's almost making me like regret, not really making me regret, but like it's putting a bad taste in my mouth for these, later written stuff, these more, written more recently things. So I'm excited to get back into Frank's stuff. So next we're going to be reading Dune Messiah, and I'm really excited to jump right into that because I know that it's going to feel like Frank's work. It's going to be more philosophical and like getting into these higher questions and stuff, and not just cataloging random events in a sci-fi world universe kind of situation. So I'm really excited to get to that. So let's go ahead and jump over to the spoiler section so I can talk a little bit more detail about the stuff that really bugged me. So, spoiler warning for Paul of Dune by by Brian Herbert and Kevin J. Anderson. So, one of the things that really bugged me, like during the War of Assassins, right? There's this entire plot to kill the Padishah Emperor, to kill Shaddam the Fourth or whatever. We go through the entire plot. Everything's all set up. It's been done, and it's like, it's like this whole thing. Like this guy's like, working on it, like the plan that he enacted to basically irradiate this planet and kill all these people was so, like, he put in a lot of effort for this plan and it was totally going to work. But then it's like you get to the room and he starts talking his stuff and he's basically saying he's going to pull the trigger because he's basically like a suicide bomb situation. And he's getting to that point and he's like making the threat and he's going to do it. But then you realize, like, oh, Paul is in the room. Paul is in the room, the Emperor's in the room, Duke Leto's in the room. They all live. So, like, Paul is young at this age, and we know that they all die after Paul's, like, mid-teens or whatever. So, this plan is clearly not going to work. And then, blah, 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 another page later, well, it didn't work. Somebody betrayed him and all this stuff, and all the nukes were disabled, basically. And, like, so it's just, even the coolest part of the story that would have had a lot of tension and would have been an interesting idea and stuff just doesn't do anything. Like, it just doesn't go anywhere because there's no tension. This just feels like nothing. I thought when I got into this was going to be just like Paul on Doom immediately after, on Dune, not feels like I said Doom. It's going to just be Paul on Dune dealing with the immediate aftermath. Like, it is some of that. It is a little bit of that. Like, he's dealing with the aftermath of taking over everything and trying to put down rebels and stuff that won't recognize him as emperor, like all that kind of stuff. So that is happening. But it doesn't because I thought we were going to get into that and Paul was going to realize this idea of being emperor was very different than even his prescience had showed him, and he was going to have to learn these different lessons, and it was going to be like philosophy about ruling and all this kind of stuff. And I expected so much more coming from Dune, and then I just got this bargain basement, very basic sci-fi, and it wasn't that entertaining. I didn't care for it that much. I didn't really like the time jumping around. I didn't care for the way it was written. Like, it's very much one of those situations where people are trying to emulate someone else's writing style, which makes sense because this is, a loose sequel spinoff thing to something that exists. So you're trying to mimic Frank Herbert's actual writing style, but they can't quite do it. Like, some of the prose and all that kind of stuff, it's fairly accurate, but it's like, the voice, the feel of the voice that's telling the story is completely different. Mostly because you can feel the absence of this high-minded philosophical idea that Frank clearly approached Dune from, and probably the rest of them, I'm hoping. So, yeah. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap up my rant here because I don't have a lot of nice stuff to say about the book. I really don't. I didn't learn pretty much anything new. There wasn't anything a lot of fun, except I did learn about the little golem things, the little resurrected things a little bit. But like, it's so yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and wrap this up and end a little frustrated right here. So yeah, have you all read Paul of Dune? I don't recommend it, but if you have, let me know what you thought about it in the comments down below. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and I will talk to you all next time.